were in fact very important. Again, things like persuasiveness and relationship skills and organizational skills, all of those were important. But above and beyond any of those by far were these three non-teachable characteristics that continue to stand out and differentiate.
This is the Sales Babble Podcast, episode 210, Never Hire a Bad Salesperson Again, an interview with Chris Croner.
Welcome to Sales Babble, the podcast that shares selling secrets for non-sellers. And now your host, Pat Helmers.
Hello, Sales Babblers. This is Pat Helmers. And today we're going to talk about something near and dear to me, the hiring process. Now, as sales manager, we know that it's very time intensive, it's frustrating, and hiring can have the biggest impact on the success or failure of a sales organization. Now, this episode just isn't for sales managers, it's for people interviewing too. Chris Croner is our guest, and he is the author of the book, Never Hire a Bad Salesperson Again. And Chris believes that there's three non-teachable skills that great salespeople have: the need for achievement, competitiveness, and optimism. In this interview, Chris gives managers a process that they can use to make sure they hire exactly the right people. And then towards the end, we also give a process for those who are searching for a job, people who are interviewing. If you go into the back catalog, you can see I've been talking about this topic for quite some time with some solo episodes. You may want to dig into those, and I'll make sure and place those in the show notes. Making sure you got the right people or making sure that you're working for the right company is probably the most important decision that you can make in your sales career. So, with no further ado, let's get to it. Welcome, Chris. Are you ready to babble?
Yes, I am.
Chris, I was reading your book the other day, Never Hire a Bad Salesperson Again, right? You're an author of that, right?
Yes, sir.
And I saw an interesting quote in here. It says, it's been estimated that up to 50% of the people who are currently trying to make a living by selling are in the wrong line of work.
Yes.
They may be excellent communicators, gregarious, likable, but they do not have, nor will they ever have the drive to provide a meaningful return on a huge investment you make of them.
Yep. Quite the conundrum, isn't it?
That's quite a dismal statement, don't you think?
Well, unfortunately, it's a truthful statement, and that's one of the challenges that so many companies face. When you ask someone, what does it take to be a successful salesperson? They're going to typically tend to rely upon the common tropes. Oh, I need to find someone who is persuasive, the person who has the gift of gab, the person who is skillful at building relationships. And yes, those things are all, of course, important. Then if you ask the candidate, what do you think they're going to be looking for in that successful salesperson as you interview for that role? Oh, they're going to be looking for somebody that, again, is good with people because I just want to help people. And they kind of come in with this idea that I'm gregarious, if you will, therefore I'm going to be successful as a salesperson. And again, when we're looking for a hunter salesperson, that is a characteristic that's important at the top of the house, if you will, but it's not the basement, it's not the foundation, it's not the most important thing.
So your thesis really here is as part of the book, is that we have a tendency to do a poor job filtering out and assessing candidates. And oftentimes our sales decisions, our hires, are poor decisions.
Yes. Again, and the challenge is the fact that most folks, when they're interviewing, they don't necessarily have a structure in front of them. Not everyone is taught, here's how to interview, here's how to hire effectively. They're really a series of steps that you can follow. And people tend to think, well, I've got a golden gut. I'm going to sit down with this candidate and I'll just know that they're going to be a successful salesperson. And yes, there's an aspect of that I would say plays into cultural fit. And cultural fit is certainly important. But underneath the surface, just getting a good impression for that candidate is not going to tell you whether or not they're going to be a successful hunter. Sales candidates, when they're interviewing, are often reading books on how to interview effectively. And most of those books will talk about, okay, here are things that you can do to present yourself effectively. Here's how to essentially take over the interview. And so if you sit down with that sales candidate and you're just having kind of a polite conversation, maybe talking a bit about the weather, talking about their flight in, then maybe trying to sell them on the job, and then giving them the chance to kind of go through their spiel that they prepared, they're going to essentially do just that. They're going to take over the interview. And then you're left after the interview thinking, okay, I guess he'll make a good salesperson. I'm not sure, but you know what? I'm going to go with my gut. And again, that's not the way to do it. There's really a step-by-step process, specific things that you can look for to determine whether that person is going to be successful.
So why don't we dig into that then? So what is the process that you recommend that people use to hire sales staff?
It all starts with an effective assessment. To give you a bit of background, we got started, over 15 years ago now, researching everything that had been published on that topic academically. What is it that makes a great salesperson? As well as looking at our own work doing behavioral interviews with sales candidates and then circling back with their managers thereafter to find out who really does become successful. And when we looked at all of that data, Pat, we found many of the things, again, that you might expect to be important, as we've discussed, were in fact very important. Again, things like persuasiveness and relationship skills and organizational skills, all of those were important. But above and beyond any of those by far were these three non-teachable characteristics that continue to stand out and differentiate the highest performing hunters. And just briefly, the first of them is what we call the need for achievement. And when we talk about the need for achievement, we're talking about the person who wants to do well just for the sake of doing well. So the person who's high in need for achievement just naturally wants to set the bar high. They want to jump over that. Then they want to set it even higher again the next time. So they're constantly focused on producing excellence just for the sake of excellence. That's the first piece. The second piece is competitiveness. And the competitive salesperson we find really wants to do two things. Number one, they want to be the best among their peers. And number two, they want to win the customer over to their point of view. Because to them, psychologically, that sale is kind of like a contest of wills. And then the third piece is optimism. And that's the salesperson's sense of certainty that they will succeed, as well as their resiliency to hang in there when they face the inevitable rejection that a salesperson has to deal with. So it's those three characteristics all together, need for achievement, competitiveness, and optimism, that psychologically create sort of the perfect storm, if you will. And collectively, we refer to those three characteristics as drive. Again, the challenge being, past the age of about 21, 22, there's not much we can really do to change the person's overall level of drive. It's kind of either it's there or it's not. And the research also shows, as you can imagine, that drive is the easiest thing for a candidate to fake in the interview process and the most difficult thing to accurately rate. So that's why we advocate the use of an assessment prior to you spending time with that candidate to make sure that, again, you're identifying those higher potential candidates and avoiding spending too much more time with the individuals who many of our clients may describe as the good actors or the professional interviewers, if you will.
This really means a lot to me, because I was in the same, as a sales manager, I'm in the same space of trying to evaluate whether people would be good employees or not. So the things I would tell people are, because we're selling in the technical space, I'm looking for people who are technical, which means they're smart. Yes. I'm looking for people who are good with people, got a helpful attitude, and I'm looking for people who are competitive.
Right. When
it came to this, I could often get 2 out of 3, but getting 3 out of 3 was extremely difficult.
Yes.
Because especially techie people, some techie people just aren't all that competitive.
Yep. And again, that's the challenge with any company. It's not just tech, Pat. Any company that wants the individual who's going to be both a subject matter expert and an effective salesperson is going to need to be patient. So, for example, we'll get manufacturing companies. And again, we work with over 900 companies around the world to this point. But we'll get manufacturing companies saying, we want somebody who's skilled as both an engineer and a great salesperson.
Yep.
Good luck. They do exist, but chances are they're going to be very challenging to attract to your company from wherever they are, where they're likely being taken care of very, very well. Oftentimes companies will kind of solve that conundrum by hiring the person who's a subject matter expert. Maybe they're a great engineer in that example, but then hiring that salesperson to team up with them.
Right.
Then they have the best of all worlds.
They're sales engineers.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, but that's expensive.
It can be, yes. So then there's another way that companies will sometimes try to overcome that challenge, and they'll go for individuals who are just out of school. So they'll go to, say, job fairs. So someone, again, who has that technical expertise, who's just getting out of school, who maybe has that natural aptitude, those three characteristics, who maybe never even thought about considering a career in sales, but they have those non-teachable traits where maybe, heretofore, if you had not reached out to them, they would have gone on to pursue a career in sales if it kind of fell in their lap. They would kind of combine those things. But now you can catch them early using that approach.
Yep. I used to do that too.
Mm-hmm.
So let's stick on this idea of drive. Okay, how you said that there was a process of assessments. Maybe you could dig into that. How do we assess this person's got drive or not?
Good question. So it's all about putting, again, an assessment in place that is going to make sure that it gets the truth from the candidate, if you will, because again, there are many, many assessments out there. One of the challenges that some of them have, as you can imagine, is they tend to be just a little bit too easy. For sales candidates especially, I'm sure you've seen those online tests. They can often be too easy for sales candidates to kind of size up the test, figure out what it's looking for, and then just kind of fake their way through. So you want to make sure that you're looking for those three characteristics: need for achievement, competitiveness, and optimism, those drive elements, as well as, again, the other important sales skills that we can talk about in a few minutes, but that you're doing so using a question format that will eliminate faking. So in our case, we use a question format called forced choice, which, again, is specifically designed to eliminate faking. The way those questions work is, for each question, the person gets a series of 3 statements, all of which will sound positive. So a question, for example, may say something like, I consider myself a leader, I have great relationship skills, I'm very organized. Okay, now which of these is most like you and which is least like you? So obviously that then forces the candidate to make some very difficult distinctions. Yes,
Icky.
But then it gives us a much better sense of their real priorities. And as they're working their way through the assessment, we're constantly monitoring their consistency as they respond, because as you can imagine, if they do try to fake the test, it's going to be very difficult for them to remember consistently what they ranked most and least across the entire assessment. So again, it's designed to be very robust for you in that regard.
Interesting.
Yep.
Huh. What else? What else do you do?
So then the key is to place an assessment like that as far as you can toward the beginning of the funnel. So starting out with, say, a resume review. And one of the questions we'll often get is, again, what do you look for in a resume review, or, say, a LinkedIn profile that helps to determine whether the person is necessarily going to be a high drive candidate. And we've had some companies where almost every single person they put through is high in drive, the green zone. We always give you the score from 1 to 5. These are the folks that are always the 4s and 5s, the greens. And so I've asked them, what are you guys looking for on the screening side? Say, in a resume review that's so consistently predicting that these folks are gonna be higher in drive. And they said really 3 different things. Number one, of course, they look for the person that is more of the passive candidate than the active candidate. Because, of course, if someone's been actively out there looking for a long time in the sales space, there can oftentimes be a good reason for it. So that's the first thing. The second thing they look for is the person's not a job hopper, so they have some longevity in the positions they've held. And then the third element is they look for the person that's able to provide some sort of metrics to show that they've been successful previously. They find those 3 things all together. Although it's not a perfect correlation, they do tend to predict an overall higher drive score. So you start with your resume review, move on to your assessment, and then move on to your interview process. Now you can feel confident that you're spending your time with, again, a much richer texture of candidate, if you will. Keeping in mind that now during the interview process, we know the best predictor of future behavior is previous behavior. So using the questions that we provide in our book on page 81, using those well-constructed behavioral interview questions, you can now dig deep. So for example, we talked about the 3 elements of drive, starting with need for achievement. Tell me about the greatest goal you ever accomplished professionally. Really have them flush that out for you. Then you can reflect back to them. You have to be proud of that. How do you intend to top it? Again, the person high in need for achievement has a plan to top it, and they love the fact that you've put them up to the plate and given them the chance to knock that question out of the park. What kinds of sacrifices have you had to make to be successful? What does that person consider to be a sacrifice? Was it they had to come in a couple weekends in the previous year, or was it something more substantial? Now compare that to the kinds of sacrifices you've seen your best performers make. When was the last time you were competitive at work? What did that look like? And then for optimism, tell me about a time when you remained persistent, even though everyone else around you gave up. Now tell me about another time, giving those consistent examples. The more reliably we can find those examples, the more consistently and reliably we can predict that that person is going to be engaged in those behaviors for us going forward.
I used to do things like this. What do you think of this?
Mm-hmm.
like I would look at a resume and I go, this guy looks good, and I would send an email saying, I read your resume.
Mm-hmm.
It looks like you might be a really good fit. Give me a call, and I give my phone number, and I wait and see if they call me 2-3 times.
Oh, sure. You could, because what you're essentially doing is you're giving them the opportunity to show that persistence that
Actually
you'd ideally
exhibit
like
it,
to see.
exhibit the behavior. It's one thing to
Exactly.
say I got drive. It's another thing to like show me you got drive.
Very, very true. Although keeping in mind, of course, that while this person is a candidate, they're going to be on their best behavior. And that works in a couple of ways. On the positive side, yes, they may call you, they may do all those things, but keeping in mind, we want to make sure that once they've got the job, once that pressure is relieved, now they're going to behave in that same way. They're going to continue. And on the other side,
Absolutely.
by the way, if you see negative behaviors in the candidate, like, you know what, I'm not going to come in for that interview today. I have something else going on. I'm going to reschedule. Again, this is the person on their best behavior. Now imagine how they're going to perform going forward. So again, making sure that
you want to.
we're looking at, exactly.
Right.
Looking at
I
that
didn't think
single
twice of
individual
cutting people.
Yep.
You know, if their grammar looked bad, if anything seemed negative,
Yep.
I'd say, I just don't think you'd be a good fit here.
Mm-hmm.
I don't
Yep.
think.
And that's best case scenario.
Yeah. Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
What else can we do?
Well, it's important to keep in mind, too, that we want to review the person's resume with them earlier on in the process,
Yes.
sort of at the beginning of the interview.
Yeah,
One of
absolutely.
the things that's very helpful to do when we're reviewing the person's resume is for each position they've held, I like to ask our clients to ask that candidate 3 questions. Number 1, give me the basic job description. What did you do in that role? Number 2, if you were on a sales team, where did you rank on that team? Of course, the competitive person will know exactly where they ranked. And number 3, what got you to move on to the next position? And of course, I'm sure when you've asked that 3rd question in the past, you've heard people will occasionally have somewhat guarded answers, things like, oh, there were some misunderstandings with my supervisor, or there were some differences of opinion regarding my salary, things like that. When we start getting those guarded answers, what's effective to use at that point is what we call the magic wand question. Okay, fine. If we had a magic wand and we could change 3 things about that job so you would have never wanted to leave, what would those 3 things be? And that's when you start to get a kernel of the truth. Oh, let's see, my assistant wouldn't have quit. I would have gotten paid more. I wouldn't have yelled at the sales VP. They give you something you can start to dig in on. And then the key is to see whether or not that behavior has emerged in other situations, as I mentioned as well. Because again, the more examples we can find, the more reliably we can predict that that person is going to perform that way for us. Another issue that we'll often deal with, say, with startups or companies hiring their first salespeople. They can oftentimes be very attracted to individuals, say, who are coming with a resume from, say, a very large company, thinking, wow, this person likely has had world-class sales training. They say that they've been successful at this very large company. And I'll always remind them to make sure that they find out what led to that person's success. Was it the fact that they had, again, all of that brand recognition and collateral material behind them, or was it their own effort in and of itself? That's a key distinction. Oftentimes when a smaller company, for example, is asking about what can they do to get an individual who's going to be, say, up to speed relatively shortly, I'll tell them really 2 different things. Number 1, you want to find the person that has at least 2 to 3 years of relevant experience at a company of similar size. And number 2, a person who, again, on the drive test scores a 4 or a 5 in that green zone, if you will. Again, those 2 things, again, not a perfect correlation, but is going to go a long way to bringing on an individual who's going to know the right things to do. You don't necessarily need to do sales 101 purely with them, but then they're also going to have that passion to do it. One of the temptations, again, that many sales managers will have when we first start speaking to them is, again, in the interview process, say, I'm looking for somebody with a mortgage, couple car payments, kids in school, things like that, those external pressures. And yes, those can certainly be very motivating. But at some point, those pressures are going to be relieved. The key question is, what will that person do at that point? That's why we look for that need for achievement. That person high in need for achievement, when they surpass that point.
I like that. I
Yep.
I had a lot of sales managers say, yeah, I'm really excited about this guy. He just bought a brand new Lexus.
Yep.
As if that's going to be the motivator for him to do a great job.
Yep. Yep. And again, they're doing their best. I mean, they're trying to figure out, what's going to motivate this guy? Well, again, the person that's motivated by those external things, motivated by money, we find that, again, they tend to get up to a certain level of production, then they level off. We talk about those guys in the book. We call them the flatliners. And sales managers will often scratch their heads thinking, wait a minute, I've seen this guy sell. I know he's got what it takes. I know he can do it. But all of a sudden, he's just turning in the same performance quarter after quarter after quarter, whereas the person motivated by need for achievement will continue to excel. They'll continue to produce.
Right. Right. That's all about the love of the game.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Again, money's still important to them, but they look at money the same way that, say, a great athlete looks
Yeah,
at points on the scoreboard. It's how
exactly.
they show how well they've done
Bingo.
rather than their goal in and of itself. So imagine if you were to approach Michael Jordan before a big game and ask him what his goal was. He wouldn't say his goal is just to score a lot of points. His goal is to be the greatest ever. But then if you said, okay, we're gonna cap you, Michael. Anything you score beyond, say, 20 points, we're not going to put up on the board. How would he play? He wouldn't have that same passion because now he's not able to show how well he's done. He doesn't have that evidence, if you will. So it's a key distinction, but the key is in looking for that need for achievement. Think of that kid in school that just has to get an A. It's that mentality. And that's one of the questions we'll often get too. After I give a presentation, people will come up and say, hey, what about my kids? What leads to that need for achievement in someone? And it's really a combination of nature and nurture. So on the nature side, there's the way the person is naturally wired when they're born. There are 5 main factors that psychologists just describe in delineating a person's personality. And one of those is what they call conscientiousness, a piece of which is that need for achievement. Again, think of that kid in school that just wants to do well. But then on the nurture side, it's being held accountable. And it could be being held accountable for many things. It could be academics. It could be sports. It could be watching their brothers and sisters. It could be band. But whatever it is, the person has that natural wiring to be, again, conscientious, have that need for achievement. And number 2, they're held accountable for their behavior. Then at that point, past the age of about 21, 22, that characteristic is relatively solidified. So then the key is, as a sales manager, looking for that, then also looking for those other 2, competitiveness and optimism. The person, again, when it comes to optimism, you're looking for that person that even on their darkest day, they know they're going to be successful. Those 3 things together, that's the combination.
I love it. Mm-hmm. Chris, how can people find you online? How can people find your book?
Never Hire a Bad Salesperson Again is available on Amazon. And they can find us online at salesdrive.info, salesdrive.info. Happy to offer your listeners a complimentary drive test assessment. If they are in the sales management space or the HR space, it's for sales candidates. You can give to a salesperson or a sales candidate. There's a big green button when you go to salesdrive.info. You can request that assessment. And of course, if you do so, I would be delighted to personally spend some time with you on the phone as well, talking about your unique needs and providing as much guidance as I possibly can. As I mentioned, we work at this point with over 900 companies around the world. Happy to bring the best of what we've learned to your listeners.
So this is the assessment that we talked about earlier that talks about the need for achievement, competitiveness, optimism. It digs into all of that, right? Awesome.
The drive test. The drive
test. I love it. I love it. Mm-hmm. So if you could give our audience a piece of advice that they can go take action on today, this would probably be for sales managers. Mm-hmm. I don't know. Is there advice for sellers too? We could flip this around, right?
Mm-hmm.
Say I'm looking for a job. What can I do with this information that we've shared before? How can I leverage this?
That's a really good question. Well, there are really 2 sides to it. There are oftentimes
mm-hmm.
on the sales candidate side, one of the challenges that people just exploring a career in sales will have sometimes is that they don't necessarily understand what's going to be demanded of them and what's going to be demanded of a successful hunter. Because again, we're looking for the person that's going to be able to knock on the door, get the door slammed in their face, then knock on the next door with that much more certainty and enthusiasm. And yes, if you are one of those people, then taking time before that interview process to think about, when have you demonstrated need for achievement? When have you demonstrated optimism? When have you demonstrated competitiveness? And even if you're in a situation where your interviewer is not asking you those behavioral questions, bring those situations out yourself. Be the proactive one in that case. I've heard from people who have read our book as sales candidates and say that helped them to score that position. So that can certainly help on that side. On the sales manager side, I would say if there's one thing I want you to remember, make sure to use an assessment early in your process so you're spending time with high quality candidates. Happy to give you a complimentary one at salesdrive.info, but make sure that you're not spending the time with those individuals that can be very skilled at presenting themselves as an effective salesperson, but then 6 months down the road, a year down the road, they don't necessarily live up to the promises they made to, and sometimes they kind of break your heart. So,
sooner's better than later.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
Chris, this has been great. This is a great topic. I love this topic. I could talk about this all day long.
It's what I do. So yeah, me too.
Thank you very much for visiting us here in Sales Babble.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me. Very much enjoyed it.
As I said at the beginning of the show, this is probably the most important task, responsibility that a hiring manager has. You really want to make sure that you are filling your organization out with people who are a perfect fit It's really expensive bringing people online. And if you've hired the wrong candidates, oh my goodness, it's going to be nothing but pain and suffering. And I can speak about this personally because I've hired many people, and sadly, I have fired a few too. Now, if you're interviewing for a job, I'd like to follow up a little bit on what we talked about. Get a piece of paper, and in the left column, write down all the behaviors and the skills that you think a hiring manager would like to see. And then on the other side of the page, write down your examples of where you have exhibited those behaviors in your life. And go and do that item by item by item by item. That way, when the time comes, when you get asked about that, you're going to have a ready answer. And as Chris mentioned, if the item never comes up, if this topic never comes up, you then offer that. You take control of the sale. This is just like overcoming objections. This is just like digging in on what they care about. This is like a sale like any other sale. And the better prepared you are, the more likely you're going to win. To find Chris and a copy of his assessment, his free assessment, go to the show notes at www.salesbabble.com/210. And what else we got here? If you really enjoyed this episode, please share it with your friends. Word of mouth is how we grow podcasts. Or maybe you want to sponsor us becoming a Patreon, or you have a donate. We have a donation button that you can speak to. If you got a question, got a comment, don't hesitate to reach out and Babble me. That's the Babble me link, and I'd be more than happy to answer all of your questions. Thanks again for visiting us here on Sales Babble listeners. I really, really, really do appreciate it. Until next week, take care and have a highly successful and profitable day.
Thank you for listening to the Sales Babble podcast. Find us at www.salesbabble.com.